Thanks everyone for coming. Ah, recording in progress now. So let me just start by saying that this is a roundtable and not a webinar. And so a few people have mentioned that they're looking forward to my talk, but my hope is that it won't be me talking, but that it will be a discussion. Especially because at least I know that at least one of you here knows far more than I do about the text that I gave as the reading, the symposium. I'll give you a little context to when Plato reached out to me and asked if I wanted to do a roundtable. I thought of this as a topic because I'm currently in the first week of teaching some of my secondary school students a class with exactly the same title, Philosophy of Love and Friendship. And tomorrow is when we're going to be talking about the symposium that we've just begun that text, and we'll be spending some days looking at the symposium. In the little write-up, I know it did say that the reading was optional. And so we can talk about the reading as much as everyone wants to, or as little as everyone wants to, because there's a lot on love and friendship that isn't related to that. But I do have, if people are interested in jumping back in time by 2,500 years, Plato on love and Aristotle on friendship both have some really interesting things to say that I think offer a lot of value to us still here in the 21st century. Again, it always shocks me how much like 17 and 18-year-olds in 2025 still find a lot of what those texts say to be really valuable in their own lives once they get past how weird they are, because they are really weird, especially Plato is really weird. But what I thought I might do, again, I don't want to lecture, but I have a kind of an opening. I came across a passage from a novel I was just reading that raised an interesting point about love that I think is a good context to the fact that if we're looking at the history of Western philosophy, in the ancient world, they took emotions really seriously. And then there was a period of time in which emotions were viewed as kind of the contrary to reason and rationality, and were viewed as dangerous and things to kind of get past. Kind of how do you get rid of your emotions so you can think clearly? And I think we're finally entering a period in which emotions are starting to be viewed differently. So I want to do two things, and then we'll see if we want to talk about Plato. The first of which I'm going to share this passage from Hong Kong. And then I thought it might be kind of fun that the first assignment I gave to my secondary school students, that before we start looking at other people's theories about love and friendship, I asked them to, I think I used the word manifesto, but some of them were bothered by that term, but to write out their own views. And I want to share some of what they came up with about what they think love and friendship have. Actually, Mitch was in my class today, and so he's seen some of this stuff. But let me go ahead and share my screen. I think we'll still be able to see each other, hopefully. All right. Can people see that? Okay, so this is from a novel from, shoot, I forgot to look it up. I think it's about 10 years old. Hong Kong is the Korean author who won the Nobel Prize. It was either this year or last year. I've lost track of time. I think they mostly credited her with the novel The Vegetarian, which got much more attention, but this was an earlier novel. This says, "Why had I been such a fool when it came to loving you? My love for you wasn't foolish, but I was. Had my own innate foolishness made love itself foolish? Or is it that I myself wasn't all that foolish? But love's inherent foolishness awakened any foolishness latent in me and eventually smashed everything to pieces." To give context, the main character from that novel is this Korean woman who is studying ancient Greek as she's slowly going blind. And it's an interesting and fascinating text, but it does make us start to think about, again, there's this historical sense that some of you have pointed to, of like seeing reason and emotions as being contrary to each other. whereas so much of the ancient appreciation of emotions would suggest that emotions actually themselves are a form of reason, that they're a form of interpretation, and that when you're feeling emotion, it's also a judgment. It's not just a feeling. And so whether or not this causes us to have better judgments or worse judgments. But let me share here. This is what some of my students came up with. So these are 10th, 11th, and 12th graders. I pulled out, I only changed I put in the word multivalent, but no one used that word, but the other ones are all their words that I pulled out. And some of these had a lot of agreement. Some of them only one student suggested. I'll let everyone take a look and let's see what we can think about what they might be understanding loved or friendship. And we have to then figure out, should we view these as similar things or love and friendship significantly different?
I mean, I think there's I mean, I'm more of a literature person than a philosopher, but there's both, I think, lots of material in philosophy and literature that suggests that love and friendship are aligned, right? Boswell and Johnson, if I may, are friends. I don't think it's implied that they're lovers, but there's certainly love there. That would be just a literary example. Yeah, I mean, I think love and friendship are side by side.
So none of my students emphasize this, probably because they're writing for a class, having their teacher read it. But one of the big questions in the kind of the history of people writing about love is whether or not, if love has erotic elements to it, whether that's diminished it or enhanced it, or is it necessary part of it? And again, many of them view the erotic elements as being the parts that would maybe make us animalistic and diminish us as humans. This is like later medieval kind of understandings, or some would suggest that it's inherent to it. By the way, if we get to the Plato, we'll see the term platonic love is quite misleading, and I think misunderstands what Plato thinks about love, although it's a useful term to have. So, I mean, some of it I think is a linguistic problem, that we have one word to cover all these concepts that other societies have different words for because they're important distinctions between them. That we can use the word to say, I love my car, I love my cat, I love my dad, I love my lover, and it's the same word, but it's marking out really different phenomena.
What do they mean by unverifiable?
Which one? Oh, unverified. Yes. So the two students who mentioned that are students who had both studied philosophy of science with me, and so it's the type of thing that they look for, like which types of things could be verifiable. If love is an internal phenomenon, the idea is that someone might tell you, I love you, or they might tell you, I hate you. And the problem is, you could never know if it's true. You could look for external markers of it. So someone might say, I love you, and then they give you flowers. But someone could be hating you and still give you flowers. That their behavior might indicate what they're thinking inside, but you could never know for sure. The student who wrote that in class today then also said, brought up, is love falsifiable? And so we tried to figure out whether or not, if someone was dreadful enough to you, could that count as having falsified? But presumably someone could potentially even be abusive to you, but still loving you. So love might be neither verifiable nor falsifiable, meaning it's a thing that you could never know for sure. Whether or not that diminishes the value of it. A bunch of them also struggled with the fact that it seems to be a human phenomena that language is not particularly good at being able to articulate. That language is really good at describing the external world, describing categories, and like, so it can talk about trees and fish and things like that, bodies. But when it comes to psychologists call qualia, the kind of internal experience, words, because they're social, can't really capture what's happening when I feel this. You can't describe my feeling when I'm saying I love you to someone, or when I say I hate you to someone, either one. And they kind of fail at that point, which some of you mentioned, like literature, which is why often literature is some of the best way of approaching this, like, especially poetry, in which it doesn't attempt to directly describe the phenomenon, but like would circle around it and point to something, but not be able to really pull it out.
And then that interesting kind of like, at the same time, I feel so close to this person, right? I think that's part of love. You just feel so close to this person, but then there are still those moments of alienation, of like, I don't really know what's going on in the other person's head. And so that just, when we were having that conversation, it kind of sparked some of those more existentialist themes for me. And just the phenomenological experience of keeping both of those things in your head at the same time, of experiencing both of those things at the same time.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd like to add to what we're saying about this idea of unverifiable. I've been thinking about it as we have here in terms of the other person, but I know in my younger life, it was unverifiable in my own self. Like, I thought I was in love, but it really wasn't right. And maybe I was in love, but I didn't really know it. I think it's not just about the other person, it's whether you can understand it in yourself. I think that's interesting too.
Interesting epistemological question, whether or not you can be in love with someone, but not be aware of the fact that you're in love with someone. And do you always have a clear understanding of the emotions that you have, or can you have emotions that aren't consciously able to be accessible to you? I don't know the answer to that. Should we think about the symposium for a second? And again, hopefully Eric will join in, and because he knows this stuff way more than I do. But just to give you, I'm going to give you kind of I'm not a classicist, but my take on the context here, and then if anyone got a chance to do the reading, one of the freakiest stories in literature that Aristophanes gives. So the concept here is, in ancient Athens, a symposium is kind of the equivalent of our modern, like a dinner party that you might have. And just like in the modern world, if you had a dinner party, you might put together a set list to be able to have the right vibe going in the background while everyone's eating and talking. In ancient Athens, they would like hire musicians and people to come to dance. And but one of the other things that like, sorry? One of the things that in a symposium, again, not a kind of we now have this, it's just tied to like this sense of like, oh, the kind of formal academic meeting. The hosts would also view it as their obligation to come up with an interesting philosophical question to have the guests talk about after they finished eating and they were like, bloated and lying on their couches. And so the concept, this particular dialogue, involves the fact that Agathon has just won a playwriting contest and everyone wants to celebrate with him, but all his friends are still hungover from the night before, and so they decide, let's not all get drunk, and instead we'll take turns giving speeches about love, kind of like, and so it becomes, they take turns giving speeches. The speeches in many ways, some of the earlier ones are kind of trivial, kind of silly, but that they build towards the one that I think is interesting because although it seems ridiculous, it's got things in it that still echo in the modern world that I think are worth thinking about. But just, I'm not going to go into this, but for people that aren't familiar with Plato, to know that Plato in some ways was Socrates' kind of like protege, but Socrates was not an author. Plato also and Xenophon used Socrates as a literary character. So Socrates was a real person, but also as a fictional character. And so in this case, Socrates is one of the people at this party who's hanging out, deciding not to get drunk with everyone, and ultimately gives a speech. And in some ways, what I think is interesting to mark out that Aristophanes, which we'll look at, and maybe we'll get to Socrates, his is weird and abstract, but can maybe describe it without having to go into the weird and abstract details. But that one of the things that they're worried about is a concern, I think is important, is to think about is the object of love. When you're having love, who you love or what you love, how it would change the meaning of the love. And so when Aristophanes gives his speech, again, like with Agathon and like with Socrates, Plato liked to take real people and make them characters in his plays. So Aristophanes was a real guy. He was a playwright, comic playwright, wrote hilariously obscene plays that, because they're so weird, are almost never staged because they would. But in this case, he describes a myth. And so this was if you're able to get to it, the first reading, it was the short one, fairly straightforward, but describing how humans used to be. And he describes them as like all humans had these like 2 heads and 4 arms and 4 legs and 2 sets of genitals, and we're kind of like balls that would roll along. And because they had 2 heads, I'm going to kind of just gloss the details to make the story better. But because they had 2 heads, they thought they were just so smart. And because they had 4 arms, they were so impressed at how strong they were. And so if you know much about, in the ancient Greek world, when you showed too much pride over something, the gods got pissed off. And so Zeus felt the need to split them. And we don't need to get into the details of the myth, but the idea is that in splitting humans, in some ways, it gives us an interesting story about how people come to be either gay or straight, because some of these early humans had 2 penises, some of them had 2 vaginas, and some had a penis and a vagina. But the main part of this story is this idea that somehow when they were split, it meant that it gives us a sense of what the meaning of life is. This is my take on this, that life becomes important because all of us are incomplete. We've been split and there's a part of us that's missing. And what love is this attempt to be able to find the missing part to one, and it would complete us. And so it gives us a picture of humans as incomplete, but also gives us a picture of love as being, I think it links up to later versions of what you might call romantic love, these traditions. So I'm going to throw it out there, what people think about, is this a good picture of love? Does it capture something real about human life? Or maybe are there some dangerous and bad parts of it? So I think it does have some problematic aspects, other than the fact that it's probably not literally true. That's a great story. So it's, in a sense, it's almost, it's akin to the answer that Socrates ends up giving. I don't think it's worth going, it's a very abstract and weird story he tells. And there's all this debate as to whether it's also meant to be comic and ridiculous. Socrates tells a story that he says that he learned from a woman that was enslaved named Diotima. And there's a lot of, because given the status of women in ancient Athens, whether or not the fact that he says that it was a woman that told the story means that like it's priming everyone to say like, haha, how silly. Except that most people don't read it that way because it actually lines up with the whole like theory of the forms. But again, to not go into it too much, it's sometimes called the ladder of love. It's this idea that the way love is supposed to play out is that you start by seeing someone that you think is really hot. You're like, yeah, ooh, look at their body. They're so sexy. And if you stay at that level, it's diminished and you can't really understand things and you've missed the point. But that if you then your next step is to say, oh, the thing I find sexy about that person is this trait. And then you realize like, oh, other people have this trait too. And so you come to see more of a kind of a thing that they share, and eventually you step up to another level of abstraction. But long story short, eventually you're moving towards, instead of loving that person, you come to realize like, oh, maybe the reason that I find him so hot is because he reminds me a little bit of, Hermes and, some god that has some godly trait. And then, but eventually it moves you to understand these like super abstract forms, which leads you to the beauty, not a particular beautiful person of like, hey, he sure is beautiful. That leads you to beauty itself, which leads you to the good. And so this is why I think the term platonic love can be misleading, because you do want to start off using your erotic sensibilities. You start off by saying, ooh, check out that body. And you end up way past bodies in this like bizarre abstract world that, yeah, there's a whole huge package around that. But given the timing, let's get less abstract. And just briefly, because I think that where there's an interesting link in terms of friendship here, in the Nicomachean Ethics.
Sorry.
Well, and for those that haven't read the symposium, this a spoiler alert, but it does leave the clouds, because just as they're talking about all this like high-minded stuff about the good and the one and the beautiful itself. Although they had this plan to not get drunk, suddenly like the door bursts open and a bunch of drunken revelers, including like the most notorious guy in town, Alcibiades, come pouring in, and they've got all this booze, and so everyone does then end up drinking, and then there's like all kinds of flirting, and so the things move back down real fast, because once the bodies are in the room, it's a pretty hilarious end to things, especially given the connotation we have of the term symposium, because that symposium, like, I guess your average college symposium might end with some like wine and cheese at the end, but it's not going to be quite so raucous. But in regards to this idea of like how love or friendship could be defined by what it is that you love, thought it would be a useful connection in the Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle, when he talks about types of friendship, because friendship is a type of love, starts with. All forms of friendship have to be mutual. They're mutual affection, but that he separates them based on what it is when you're loving a friend, what is it that you love about the person? So older people like me, he thinks, have a tendency to have more friendships of utility. Friendship of utility means that in loving your friend, the thing that you love in your friend is the benefit that you get. Again, it's mutual. So I mean, both of you are getting benefit, and you each love the benefit. And importantly, Aristotle makes it clear, all three forms of friendship are good. You want to have all of them in your life, but they're not equally good. The third one's the best. Friendships of utility don't tend to last that long, because as soon as you no longer are getting benefit from each other. So I don't know, when I teach this, the example I always give is, imagine that you're carpooling with people, and you take turns driving. And so over the course of like, a couple of years of riding in the car with the people, you come to know about each other's lives. You get benefit from each other, but there's genuine affection there. A friendship of utility is still a friendship. When someone's kid gets braces, or like what college they're going to, and those kinds of things. But then you get a new job and suddenly you're going in a different direction, and that friendship is likely to kind of fade out. But they're good to have. Friendships of pleasure, he thinks young people tend to have more of these, and they tend to overvalue these in the way older people overvalue utility. That means that would be like a drinking buddy, or a golfing buddy, or like quilting buddy. The people, what you love is the pleasure that they give in their company. And again, these are good, but the perfect friendship or golden friendship, at first this seems weird when you talk about students about this idea that somehow it's someone's virtues that you're loving. But then as soon as you start talking about what virtues there are, especially when you ask people to say, like, what list traits that you find really important in a friend, and almost always loyalty, kindness, good sense of humor, these kinds of virtues get listed, and they come to realize that, like, for Aristotle, the third type of friendship, the best kind, is what you're loving is the traits in that person that are virtuous. And so if your friend is loyal and you love that loyalty, you become more loyal, and it enhances your own loyalty. And so you get this like great kind of cycle in which each of you is becoming more virtuous as a result of being friends with each other. And so another way of thinking about how love can be defined by the object of a love. And golden friendships are the ones that are most likely to last. They last longest. He thinks you can only have a few of them in your life, because to really have these best forms of friendship, it demands that you commit time and like actually being with people. You have to know them well. The only way you can know if someone really is loyal is if you've known them long enough, so that if there have been situations where their loyalty has been tested, and then you come to realize that they have this virtue, and but that over time, again, you want to have all of them, but that our love of friends can be defined in this way. So what do people think? Is he onto something? Yes, but with a caveat, knowing that he would say that, of course, men and women can't be friends, and all kinds of things that in the modern world we want to critique, and we'd have to parse out like where he gets things wrong. But
I'd be curious to know why he thought men and women couldn't be friends. What was his reasoning?
because he has in a history of Western philosophy where there's so much misogyny and sexism, Aristotle kind of stands out as being one of the top.
He was a
Women
cuckold, right? Wasn't he? He was
He was what?
renowned cuckold, or at least that's the tradition.
There's stories about that, but he didn't believe
Misogynist,
that women didn't have the same level of ability to be rational, and so they weren't able to develop virtues in the same way. He doesn't talk about that in the Nicomachean Ethics so much as in the Politics, but that in a sense, a woman compared to a man would be like a man and a child. He does talk about unequal friendships. He would have assumed that men and women couldn't have an equal friendship, and he thinks you can have them, but that they can only last if the one partner who's not the equal partner is improving through the friendship. But that if we parse out his misunderstanding of the way women are, I think it doesn't have to infect his real friendship. And in a sense, I think one of the most interesting things about his theory of friendship is that in the end, it ends up being about really finding your better self. That the best way that you can become a good person, a virtuous person, is you need a friend, because the friend is going to be the one that allows you to practice your virtues. If you want to become generous, you need someone around you that allows you to do generous things. If you want to be loyal, you need to have someone that you have to have your loyalty tested on, and it allows you to develop loyalty. But you also need friends, because long time people have known, and like modern psychology affirms this idea, how terrible we are at noticing our own flaws. And we're really great at noticing other people's flaws. And so the idea is that it's really important that you have someone around you that's going to call you out when you're starting to develop vices. If so, the opposite of virtues, these character traits. So if you start to like get obsessed with online gambling and you're losing money, and that would cause other vices then. So now you're starting to lie to people because you feel shame, and maybe stealing from someone because you need more money to gamble. You need someone that's going to be able to say like, hey, you're getting out of control. And you need your friend to be able to be courageous so that your friend can tell you stuff you don't want to hear. So these are the kind of virtues that it's important to have, where your friend's going to say, you're behaving badly, knowing that when friends tell you that you're behaving badly, your first response, most people's first response, isn't going to be to say, hey, thanks for letting me know, but instead to be angry and get mad at them. And so perfect friendships, if we look at the Nicomachean Ethics, one way of looking at it is kind of a handbook for happiness. And if it's a handbook for happiness, it kind of the last section is on friendship, that you better make sure you have these perfect friends around you that are going to be helping you to develop virtues. And once you've developed them, to kind of practice them on. Because in the end, we're almost out of time, but like one of the interesting big questions that's kind of lurking behind this is questions about like self-love. Under what conditions should one love oneself? And Aristotle has really interesting things to say about that. Like he talks about pride as being the kind of the king of the virtues, that pride is really important, but only if you've earned it. You should be proud of the things that are awesome about yourself, but any traits you have that aren't awesome, you should despise, because in despising them, you can get better at them. But so, I mean, I always imagine like, frat boy in college who might take pride in like how much beer they can drink. And the idea is that if you take pride in how much beer you drink, it's going to cause you to drink more. And you get more proud of because now you can drink more beer, and it's terrible for you. And so the idea is that, but if you're really honest, or if you're really loyal and you take pride in that, then you're more likely to be loyal next time, or more honest next time once you start to take. So in a way, a good friendship is a form of love, allows us to come to have self-love that would be deserved.